Well, g'day. I'm going to particularly talk about small groups, and can I say straight up, I'm a massive fan. I'm a massive fan of small groups. I think they're awesome. I think they're particularly powerful, and I think they're great contributors to helping people get deep in the Word. But, and it's a big but, only if they're done well, only if they're taken seriously. Now, it seems to actually a number of us, there are a number of common myths or common mistakes that many churches hold or many churches fall into. So it's worth talking about them, unmasking them, bringing them out into the open so that we can see them clearly and not fall into them, but rather have a clear way ahead as we approach small group Bible study ministry more effectively. See, often we're in ruts, we've talked a lot about that, and we need to get out of the ruts in the small group Bible studies context. And so let's name the ruts so that we can get out of them. So let me give you 8 myths or mistakes very briefly. Can I say some of these will touch a nerve? It's a bit like going to the dentist. You know, they'll touch a nerve, not in a positive way. They'll jolt you. They'll be uncomfortable. I don't naturally like to do this with people, but sometimes that's what's needed to get us out of the rut. So prepare for that in some of these points. Number 1, myth/mistake. Small groups are just something that churches should run because everyone does it. No. We too often fall into the trap of doing just what everyone else does or what we have always done, but why are we running them? What's the purpose of them? What are we trying to achieve? I'm the first one to say that small groups are awesome and powerful, but only if they're intentional. And Phil spoke about that yesterday. Only if there's clear thought to why we're running them. Only if there's a clear intentional design of what we want the small group ministry to achieve. They can be one of the foundational pillars of your church life alongside ministry teams and underneath your church gathering. Because you think about the people in your church and the amount of time that's available to them, and you think about what sort of church dedicated activity can they be involved in. Now, wouldn't it be awesome if everyone in our church was at the church gathering every week, they were part of a small group Bible study, and they were part of a ministry team serving the Lord. Now, wouldn't it be great if people could do way more than that? But wouldn't it be fantastic if people could do that? So the key pillars of your dedicated church engagement of your people is church, the church gathering, small groups, and ministry teams. And so we want to design the whole ecosystem very well, but particularly pay attention to those things and especially our small groups. Now, can I do a little aside here? It's worth noting the power of ministry teams as a key discipling structure in church life, so often overlooked. But if we're intentional, we can create ministry teams in our churches that are an important discipling structure alongside our small group Bible study structure, underneath our church gathering, and as part of the whole church discipleship ecosystem. Because if you think of a good ministry team for a moment, what you have is a leader who takes responsibility for a group of people to achieve outcomes. The leader cares for them, cares for their spiritual life, is concerned with how they're going and thinks about how they're going and has conversations to that end. They get together regularly because teams need to meet together. When they meet, they have a little bit of time around the Bible to be reminded of the vision, what they're actually trying to achieve. When they make decisions about the ministry they're going to do, they're reminded again and again of how their ministry fits into the cause of the gospel and what they're trying to achieve. They give it their time and their energy to serve, and they serve together, and as they serve together, they get to know each other, their families, their kids, their work, and they start to chat to each other about how they're going and how their spiritual life is going. Ministry teams, another powerful discipling pillar in church life if run intentionally. End of the aside. Back to small groups. We need to be intentional with our small groups. And so what are you going to set your small groups to achieve? It could be primarily community. It could be primarily evangelism. It could be primarily training, or it could be primarily application. But it could be growing people deep in God's word, and that's what I would advocate for. If you choose to do this with your small groups, the small group Bible study structure can be your champion deep in the word structure underneath preaching. Not your only deep in the word structure, but your champion deep in the word structure underneath your preaching, in which you can pour a great deal of time and energy and effort a structure that can have a huge impact of getting your church deep into God's word and so fueling and contributing to all of church life. Small groups are just something churches should run because everyone does it or because we've always done it and we just inherited it. No. They will be effective only if we are intentional in designing them to achieve what we want them to achieve. 2, small groups are the discipling ministry of church. Now, we've heard a lot about this, but just let me say it again briefly. No. Small groups cannot bear the weight of this demand. They can't do all the discipling work of church, nor should they. Rather, as we've talked about, discipleship is the job of the whole church, not just the small groups alone. We need ecosystem thinking in this. Every part contributes to the discipleship of every person and to the church as a whole. But within the ecosystem, there's a great power in having a focus on the purpose of getting people deep in the Word. Because as soon as you focus upon that, you can give resources to it. And once you give resources to it, what you get is leadership, someone taking responsibility for achieving that. What you also get is focused attention, them and their team thinking about how do we achieve this thing? What are the key outcomes we want to achieve? What are the strategies for achieving those outcomes? And there will be a number of strategies, as we've already talked about, for getting people deep in God's Word. But one strategy, a key strategy, perhaps your champion strategy under the preaching, is small group Bible studies. Small groups are the discipling ministry of church? No. Small groups are one key strategy, perhaps champion strategy, to help people get deep in God's Word alongside other strategies. 3, small groups are mini churches. No. Can I highlight this point? In my experience, this is a massive and pervasive problem amongst churches. Church leaders try to achieve all or too many outcomes through their small groups, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work because a leader can only achieve a limited number of outcomes. Now, we know this from leading churches. If we try to lead churches as a generalist and do everything, what we find is we either do nothing well, or we do the two things we're really good at well, and the other things don't go well. And if we as leaders of churches who have been trained, who are experts, who give all our time to do that, can't lead our churches on our own, then even more so with volunteers, giving them a small group and telling them that it's a mini church. Rather, small groups can only achieve a limited number of things. If we try to achieve too many things in our small groups, they're going to fail. You shoot at everything, you hit nothing, and every outcome will suffer. And the leaders of those groups will consistently feel like failures. And biblically, we're not required to think of each small group as a mini church. For example, 1 Corinthians 14, you find the phrase, when the whole church comes together, likely indicating that while there are smaller meetings of believers in various homes, there was something significant about the coming together of the whole church. It was when the whole church comes together that communion was celebrated and discipline happened and so on. So can I encourage you, please don't make your small groups do too much. Set a limited number of outcomes. Now, in my experience, that number is 3. I don't think you can make them do more than 3 things. And for us, it's number 1, headline, Bible. They're Bible groups. They're getting deep in the Word groups. They're transforming of the mind by God's Word groups, Bible. 2, prayer. Praying for each other, but particularly praying out of the Word and the things that have challenged and are shaping us. And 3, community. We study the Word in community, and community flows out of being in the Word together. Bible, prayer, community. Now, we also pray for friends who aren't Christians. We also pray for our mission partners. We do this to fuel mission across our church. But our small groups are not mission groups doing mission. They're not doing training. They're not doing singing. They're not doing evangelism. They're not advertising events through our small groups. Our small groups are not mini churches. They're Bible groups with 3 clear outcomes and no more. Which means we need to develop other areas of church life that are going to achieve the outcomes we need to achieve that we can't achieve through our small groups. So, for example, mission. If we're not going to do mission via our small groups, how are we going to do it somewhere else in church life? And so we need to develop a whole church ecosystem that all works together but with key pieces focusing intensely on different sets of achievable outcomes. Small groups are mini churches? No. So far, be intentional. Our small groups are for getting people deep in the Word. 3 achievable outcomes: Bible, prayer, community. Which leads to our next myth mistake. And I hope this one jolts many of us. Jars, touches a nerve, rings a bell. Now, you ready for it? Here we go. Small group leaders should be mini pastors. No. It makes sense if you think small groups are mini churches, then you think every mini church needs a mini pastor. The problems are, 1, small groups don't work as mini churches. 2, you can never find enough leaders to continue to grow your small group network. So you think about your average church. How many people would you have that could actually function as a mini pastor of a small community of, say, 12 to 16 people? Very few. A few good ones, a few okay ones, a few not very good ones. And so your average church will get to about 10 or 12 groups, maybe 15 or 16 if it goes really well. And generally, if you don't grow your small group network, what you'll find is you'll hinder the growth of your church. Now, I'm going to come back to that. In a highly educated area filled with self-starters, perhaps in a university context, people who are used to having leadership roles, you might get more of these mini pastor type of people, exceptional leaders. But you won't get enough. And so you'll stifle your small group growth, which will stifle your church growth. I'll come back to that one. So what do you do about this? Now, this will shock you. It will fly in the face of most common wisdom and practice around small group ministry. Lower the bar to entry. Have a lower bar to entry for your leaders, and then pull them up as far as they can go. Intentionally lower the bar, bring them in, develop them. Not all of them will be able to be developed, and so some will come out, others will come in, you'll continue to develop them. Some will rise right to the top, some will never be able to rise right to the top, but they will be developed. And so what you will actually get, though, is more groups formed, more people in groups, more people around the Bible, which, no matter how mediocre the leadership, people around God's Word, His mighty, powerful Word, is a good and life-changing thing, especially in the context of a healthy church ecosystem where the small group doesn't have to do it all. And what you'll also find is over time, your leadership of groups will expand, not just out in number, but if you're doing your training work well, in quality as well. Bigger, but also better. But to do this, it means intentionally having levels of leadership within your small group network. Intentionally having a diversity of leader quality within your network, not all excellent leaders. It means having lower level leaders, mid-level leaders, and high-level leaders, and developing them all as much as you possibly can, and adding more and more and more because the bar to entry is lower. In our church, we actually articulate the 3 levels of leadership: group facilitator, Bible leader, full discipler. Much easier for someone to come in as a group facilitator where they don't need to know it all, where they can help people get into the Word, ask the questions, keep pointing people back to the Bible, host things well, than feeling they have to be a Bible leader or a full discipler. But then we work with them to get as many as possible to become Bible leaders, to become full disciples, intentionally trying to help them move through the levels. Now, as soon as you lower the bar, they need support. As soon as you bring in people lower, they need scaffolding. They need helps. They need Bible study materials. They need training. They need someone supporting them. Now, none of this needs to be particularly complex. It's just as you lower the bar, you need to build in support structures around people to make it harder for them to fail, to give them the support that they need, and to raise them up as far as they can be raised. Now, something to be aware of in all this is what we've termed leadership standard creep. So at some point, you start a bunch of small groups with the leaders you've got and you think, they're not that great, but I've just got to start something. And so you go reasonably low bar and you start. You start the groups, you support them. Some leaders don't last, some do. But over time, the ones that stick get to be okay. In fact, they get to be quite good. Tom, over 6 years, becomes quite a decent leader. And then you look around your church and you think, we haven't got any leaders here. There's no one like Tom here. Why is this so? Because your view of what a leader is has changed. It's not Tom 6 years ago, it's Tom today. And so you've had your leadership standard in your mind has crept up. So you have to keep intentionally, we've found, keep working at keeping the bar to entry low and then developing people as much as possible. Now, is that hard to hear? Is that something different? Small groups should be run by mini pastors? No. I think we need to keep intentionally keeping the bar to entry low, providing support structures and training, and so lifting up our leaders as far as they can go. 5. Small groups are just a bunch of individual groups. No. This will be drastically reduce the effectiveness of your small group Bible studies and will hinder your church growing. Rather, I think it's great to conceive of your small group network as a team of teams. That is, all those Bible studies as a network, all your groups are a team together, not a whole bunch of separate entities. That's the primary team, if you like, of this area of church life. Now, as you get larger, what you'll find is you've got 15 groups, but then you move into 16, 17, 18, 20 groups. You can't manage it all on your own, or someone can't. And so you actually find I need others to look after 5 or 6 groups each under me. When that happens, you then have smaller teams under another leader within the larger team. We also try to conceive of actually each growth group as a team. The leader helping the group members help each other go deep in the Word. And in each growth group, we try not only just to have one leader, but to develop a mini team within each growth group. A leader, an assistant leader, a leader in training, sometimes even another. What that does is it means you've got partners in crime. You're not on your own, you're working together. It's a team working together to help your growth group work as a team. Within a team, under a leader, within the wider growth group team together. We try to draw it all together. A team of teams. And once you conceive it like this, then you can actually work hard and intentionally at developing your whole growth group Bible study network as a team of teams. Now, how are you going to do that? So much that could be said. I can't say it now. But in my opinion, having a termly meeting for all your growth group leaders together is a no-brainer. Now, if you've never done one, just start with one, or start with 2 in a year or something like that. It's a no-brainer not just to prepare our people for leading Bible studies for that term, though that can be a great and key thing you can do. It's a great thing to do not just so you can do training to help your leaders become better, though that is a fantastic thing to do as well. But it's to create a team of teams. We're all in this together, working together for a common cause and a common mission, even if we're doing it often in the week separately. We can then deliver common vision, common encouragement, common awareness of where our church is at and where our church is heading and how we need to pray and what we need to work towards, common training, common preparation, and that sense we're all in this together as a team. And even the way you structure your termly meeting of your leaders can actually make a big difference, where you do stuff as a whole, but then can break into smaller components of teams. Thank you. Having a termly meeting, I feel, is a fantastic thing to do. But there's other things you can also do for your whole small group network to create a team of teams. Common structures, common communication, common studies. Now, you don't need to produce them. There's stuff out there to take. Common resources, common training. Everything we can do to create a team of teams mentality. We're doing this together. I'm not on my own. We're in this work together for the cause of the gospel. Common mind, common direction means that the whole group ministry will function more effectively, but also we can use it to achieve other things in church life. Big project, a big campaign. The small groups can be mobilised together as a large group towards those ends, if done carefully and well. Small groups are a bunch of individual groups? No. Every small group is a team within a larger team creating a united groups network, no matter whether you have 6 groups or 600 groups. 6.
As a church grows, we should start more small groups. Now, that's right, but it's not merely as the church grows that we should start more small groups. We do need to do that. But we actually need to start more small groups in order to fuel church growth. There's actually a correlation, there's a relationship between small group Bible study growth and church growth. It's not automatic, but if small groups are really getting people deep in God's Word, praying for each other, caring for each other, rich community life, then this will actually start to have an impact on people. It will actually start to transform them, the way they think, the way they live, the way they give, the way they serve, the way they come to church, the way they invite people along, the way they will do all these things which will contribute to church growth. And what it means is the more you draw your fringe into your core, small groups, ministry teams, it then enables you from that core to reach out again and draw more fringe into your core, and to reach out again and draw more fringe into your core. If this is the case, and small group growth does actually relate in some way to church growth, we actually need to be intentional and relentless in pursuing growth. That is, growth in the number of people in groups, growth in the number of groups, growth in the number of the leaders of the groups, which means these things become prime outcomes, which means watching and measuring, and then pursuing targets prayerfully and intentionally. As the church grows, we should start more small groups. Well, yes, but not only. We need to fuel church growth by starting more groups. And if we don't, we actually might hinder church growth. 7, small group leaders will just appear. I think we all sort of know that that's not true, but we often don't want to own it. Right across the country, in all our churches, we need leaders. We need leaders of ministry teams. We need leaders of small groups. And we know that the more leaders we have and the better leaders they are, the more we can do effectively. But I think what often happens is we wait for them to turn up. And sometimes they do. People who are naturally gifted, people who are self-starters, people who have been trained in the workplace, people who are trained at another church, they turn up to our church. And if we're passingly reasonable at our job, we grab them and get them engaged in some sort of leadership somewhere in church life, often leading a small group Bible study. But we'll never get enough leaders this way. Rather, we need to be intentional about making leaders. You can talk about training, developing, they're all good words, but making just has a sense of, I'm going to try to make something out of virtually nothing. I'm going to try to make leaders, which requires a training system. Now, I could say so much here, but can I just give you a few brief thoughts? A training system, a good training system, is not just a talking head. So whenever you hear the word training, I think we often tend to think someone's speaking from up the front, telling us some stuff, which can be helpful. This is a small piece of a good training system, but not the heart and soul of it. See, when does the best training happen? How do you actually learn to do something? The best training happens on the job. It's ideal if you've seen someone else do it first, so you've got a bit of a model to follow. But then the thing you need to do is do it and do it and do it again. Is practice, 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 practice. And then if you add reflection to that, practice, reflect. How did I go? What went well? What went badly? What could I do better next time? The quicker the improvement. Add to this someone who's actually helping you reflect on how you went by giving you feedback and supporting you, the more and more quickly you improve. Add to this the talking head up the front, giving you some input to help you reflect on your area. Add to this getting together with peers, other leaders who are working the same sort of work so they can share their common experiences and ideas and their ways of doing things. You get a pretty awesome training system. But the heartbeat is self-reflective on-the-job training with someone giving you feedback and support. Small group leaders will just appear? I don't find that. We need to make them. 8, finally. People are going to find their way into small groups and stay in them. I find it's like herding cats. People generally don't naturally just find their way into the small group network, and people generally don't just naturally stay in the small group network. Now, some do, but not all. Imagine this with me. In fact, I think I've got a picture. There you go. It's brilliant, isn't it? There's a river flowing into our church life. It's blue. Now, if you don't have a river of people flowing into your church life, that's another issue and something else to deal with. But there's some sort of flow in to your church life, a river. Now, we would love as many people as possible who are Christians to be collected into the small group network, to join a small group Bible study where they're in community around God's word prayerfully every week. And what we don't want is for people to flow out the other end. We want to keep them in the dam. So you've got inflow, you've got outflow, you've got the dam. And if we do our work well and more people are collecting in the dam in this small group network, the dam grows bigger. Oh, there you go. The dam grows bigger. Now, bigger means I need more groups. I need more leaders. I need to expand what's going on. And so it starts to make you think, how can I be intentional at every point here? A, how can I maximise the inflow into the dam? How will we bring people in, connect people in? What will be the connecting work? Will we have a connecting course? What about the people who are in church with us but are not in a small group, and it would be good for them to be, and they could be in a small, how will we draw them in? How can we maximise inflow, the blue? B, how can you minimise outflow? Now, the only way you can do that is if you know who's in the dam. How are we going to know who's actually in the groups and who's there regularly and hasn't left them? And when they leave them, how are we going to get them back in? Who's going to do that work? Who's going to have those conversations with those people? C, how can we build the dam bigger? How can we grow leadership? How can we start more groups? What are the strategies for achieving that? And D, how can we make the water quality of the dam better? It stretches a bit. How could we make your whole small group network better? How can we make the groups better? The leaders better? More impact on the people in the groups? How can I maximise inflow, minimise outflow, build a bigger dam and make the water quality in the dam better? When it comes to getting God's people deep in His Word, I think small group Bible studies can be an awesome contributor. A champion structure, very, very powerful, but only if done well, only if taken seriously. Now, small groups are not the only way to help our people get deep in God's Word. And we're going to hear now some more other ways in church life to help people get deep in God's Word. So we're going to hear from Trev and Hazy. Come on up.